jumping into our bandwagon, stepping on our lawn into the space that we were doing it before it was cool.
Yeah, and we certainly don't necessarily make it cool.
This is true. The fact that nobody did it, that was what was cool about it. The fact that everybody else is doing it now. Maybe we'll go back to in person just because we don't like to be.
Which is counterculture.
So, once it's cool, we don't want to do it anymore. It's like that band you were listening to when you're, when they were playing in front of 5 people. All of a sudden, they're on TV, and you're like, oh, nah, not interested in them anymore. I actually had that experience. I remember seeing bands like who, with like a dozen people at gigs, and then like they're on the radio.
Oh yeah,
and you'd be like, nah, sorry, I'm out. I was a real fan first.
I remember before they got famous.
They've sold out now, man. They're sold out.
I actually do kind of have that feeling with Muse, like their first kind of major album, Showbiz, and I absolutely fell in love with that. And then the next few albums that they had over there, like Origin of Symmetry and what are the names of their bloody albums now? But
Sunburn was their first record.
Sunburn, yeah, and that was sort of like, fuck yeah, that was amazing. And then people over the following years started to go, oh yeah, they're like this generation's Queen. Everyone loves them. It's like, they don't really sound much like Queen.
Actually, I would argue they sound a lot like Queen. Have you listened to anything since Black Holes and Black Holes and Revelations?
So their newer stuff?
Their newer stuff. Their newer stuff is basically The Resistance, for example. It's basically an album of Queen covers that are originals. They sound a shit ton like Queen. They are a lot like Queen. It's uncanny how, like, I would say their first 3 records were like not. They were kind of. I remember when they first started out, people were like, "They have a new Radiohead."
Oh no, one is enough, thank you.
This is the man who's been to see Nickelback more than once.
Hey, there's only one Nickelback.
That is correct. So there was that thing, that comparison when they first came out, which obviously I don't think was apt. Well, I guess you can kind of see it in their early stuff. But their first 3 records were one thing. They kind of built their own sound there. But then, like, after that, then you got The Resistance and Drones and whatever else. I don't listen to their records anymore. They're very, very self-indulgent and pompous now. But yeah, I really hear a very strong. I remember The Resistance in particular, like a really strong, like someone had sat down and really got into Queen while they were making that record.
That one definitely, I do hear it there. But when people were saying that they sound like Queen before that album, it's like I don't really hear it. But
I didn't hear it before that record. That was really actually kind of annoyed me about it. It was like, I don't need you to sound like Queen. No. Anyway, so Queen are a great band, but and I always say, like, if you're going to rip somebody off, rip off the best.
Absolutely, absolutely, and they've certainly made success for themselves.
They're popular. They're an excellent choice. I remember seeing them here in Melbourne when they played at Festival Hall in front of a couple of thousand people, and then in a few years they're playing giant stadiums, and oh my god! Sorry, I don't want to be that guy. It's a bit too cool for them, but yeah, I am more often than not that guy. So I should just own it.
Yeah. Well, that's just because you are a trendsetter, as we are on Armchair Producers.
Indeed. We were just talking, actually. So this week is an exciting week for me, and then of course the world as a result. I am actually going back to the movies this weekend for the first time since maybe February.
I think the last movie that we both watched at the cinema was Birds of Prey.
It would have been, February, early March, and whenever that was out of the cinemas here in Australia. And gosh, imagine if that was the last thing you ever saw. Like, I mean, how disappointing.
Yeah.
Every now and again, I meet someone who's, it's so good. And you're like, all right. But anyway, I'm going to finally get into seeing Tenet at the glorious Astor Theatre here in Melbourne. So I'm very excited to finally get to see it because I managed to avoid spoilers and reviews for the last 3 months or so since it actually came out everywhere else.
I am I am gunning to see that in the cinema. I have purposefully ignored the Wikipedia page, any reviews, anything. I think I've only actually even watched the trailer maybe twice. So I just want to go in with as much of a fresh perspective as possible. And I think to rechristen cinema for 2020 or what's left of it, I think that's probably going to be a good choice.
I think so.
Chris Nolan hasn't exactly put a foot wrong.
It's going to be, it seems to, look, it's going to be interesting, right? You're going to walk out of it, you're going to love it, you're going to hate it. I don't think you're going to walk out going, feeling neutral about it and feeling like it was like seeing a Matthew McConaughey rom-com or something like that.
This is failure to launch 2. What the hell?
That was exactly what film was in my head. But yes, I think that I have in Christopher We Trust. I just think back to it. I said it many times on the show when I saw The Last Jedi or whatever it was called, The Rise of Skywalker. That's right. The last Star Wars film.
The Rise of Mediocrity.
Then they had the first 5 minutes of Tenet at the IMAX theater I was in, and I was like, I can't wait to see this movie. And it was by far the best thing I saw that evening in the cinema, and that definitely including the J.J. Abrams film. So that was enough of a teaser for me to go, I'm on board. Can't wait to see what he does with this.
Yeah.
So anyway, hopes are up, hopes are high. So I am primed to be disappointed. But fingers crossed it doesn't happen. But I would just be excited to be back in the theater again. I might even get a chop chop.
Oh, you devil!
Which I never do. I don't eat at the cinema. I don't feel the need to eat at the cinema. I would just like to point out, by the way, that this has been up on my thing for about 3 weeks now, and no one's noticed it.
I can't read it. What does it say?
Armchair Producers.
Well, look at that. We are slowly but surely getting merchandise, ladies and gentlemen. And I actually did design a T-shirt that eventually I'll get around to actually producing because it was actually kind of funny.
I thought so.
Yeah.
But the problem is if you light it up, the camera hates it and just goes, no, I can't do that.
So, sorry, auto censorship.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a bit like Trump's tweets. He just goes, that's misleading. Go away.
You had to bring that up, didn't you? We will not talk about that this episode. There is enough drama as it is.
No. I mean, wait for the movie though.
That's gonna be so good.
I just hope Oliver Stone lives long enough to make it. I mean,
he would do a fucking scathing version. My God, that would be impressive.
It's kind of his thing. He did the Nixon film, he did JFK, he did the W.
Yeah.
It's his jam. He makes films about presidents.
Yeah.
How old is Oliver Stone, by the way? He's old.
70s or 80s now?
Yeah, he'll be in his 70s. 74. Yeah. So give him a year and he'll be on it, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's all going on. I'm sure people are sick and tired of hearing about that because that's it's been in the news this week.
Yeah. Well, should we get on to the things that people are actually tuning in for?
Oh, yeah, I guess.
Should we do it? Yeah. So we are diverting sharply from current affairs to the Cold War Star Trek movie of The Undiscovered Country.
Yes. Now, this is an even numbered Star Trek movie, which means it's generally speaking good. 2, 4, 6, and 10 are the better Trek movies, and the rest are better left alone. This is actually, I was thinking while I was watching, I think this would probably be my second favorite of the original, the OG Star Trek movies, which is quite remarkable, really. 6 films in 12 years, I think. That's actually quite a lot.
Yeah.
That's one every couple of years. The only thing you sort of compare about, obviously Marvel's one today, but Fast and Furious kind of do that kind of one every couple of years now, but they manage to keep the entire cast together.
Ooh, okay, you're back. For some reason, you suddenly looked as if you were in a sandstorm.
Well, that would be the sandstorm that's going on at the moment. Just ignore that.
Okay. Yep. Ignore the man behind the curtain.
I wonder if they knew. This is, of course, though, the last of the original Trek movies. I don't count Generations as an original Trek movie because really only Shatner was in that.
Mm-hmm.
And the others had a
And
couple
even then, he wasn't in it that much.
much. No, it was really the handing of a baton, really.
Yeah.
For the original series to next gen.
Mm.
And what a ham-fisted, clunky job they did of it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I actually went back and rewatched after watching the Undiscovered Country. I went back and watched some more of the. I carried it on, and I watched more of the Next Generation movies going on from Generations, and I'll talk about them more in depth. But I got a very similar vibe on the construction of Star Trek Generations as I did from Mission Impossible 3, where it just kind of feels like 3 episodes bolted together to make a feature. It's weird.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I thought you were going to say that there's a similarity behind the construction of a Star Trek movie, because this is a very typical one of them. They certainly were figured out by this point in time how to make a good Star Trek movie. The first one, the Star Trek the Motion Picture, kind of gets shit on a lot, and it is kind of dumb. But there were some interesting ideas floating around the dumbness. So
it wasn't necessarily a bad movie. It was just kind of, all right. You've done better in the show, and this kind of just feels like more of the show. It doesn't feel like a big screen thing.
And it's kind of clunky. It's all over the shop. All the stuff that happens in that movie, it's like, why are they going to get stuck in a wormhole or something when they're in warp? Because that never happens.
Reasons.
It kind of felt like an answer to Star Wars. Hey, Star Wars made a lot of money.
Yeah.
Make me a Star Wars, but with William Shatner in it.
Yeah. Well, think about the time period that these movies were coming out, and going into after Return of the Jedi, there wasn't really a franchise space-based movie series. Star Wars came in and blasted the box office with 3 movies and then vanished until 1999. And so Star Trek was sort of like, okay, we're the only real franchise player in that space. There were lots and lots of other sci-fi movies and space-based movies, but they were all standalones. Like you think of like The Last Starfighter and so many great individual things. And it's like, okay, they didn't spawn sequels. They didn't franchise in any way. They didn't even spawn TV versions. It was weird.
Well, it is the Star Wars effect that got these films made. I think someone could come out and tell me I'm wrong, but the Star Trek the Motion Picture came out in 1979. The original series got cancelled on television in 1969 after 3 seasons. And there'd been sort of floaty ideas of another TV show being kicked off. Roddenberry was working on one for a while, but I think it was the actual Star Wars phenomenon. All of a sudden, science fiction's cool again. Here's our Paramount has this existing incredibly popular property that they can parlay into something else. But I think it was those Star Wars fans, the Star Wars movies that got these films made. And I don't know. I off the top of my head, I don't know how well they did. But I have to imagine it did reasonably well, considering they made 6 of them in 12 years.
Yeah.
And as you sort of said, this one is really a parable about the Cold War. But just to take a step back, there's a way you construct these movies when they're done well. That is, split the crew up, give them an obstacle to overcome, and before they can come together at the end to overcome the big bad threat. And so they did it really well in this. If I go to jump ahead to something like First Contact, which I think is a really, really strong Star Wars movie, we split our crew up. We have the crew down on the planet. We have Picard up on the ship. We have the Borg, doing their thing, and then we need them to all come together at the end to, to overcome it.
It seems to be like if you're making an ensemble movie or a movie with lots of very popular characters, that's the way you do it, because you split them up so that you're not having to consistently cut between all these little micro stories, and you are able to partner people up to get that odd couple effect of like the Star Trek movie that kind of does it quite well, but not for very long, was I think it was Star Trek Into Darkness, where McCoy and Spock are on their own and it's sort of like, oh, don't leave me, and then Spock gets teleported off. It's just that mixing of different kind of chemistries. There's Get down, you dirty little beast. No, not behind the TV. My cat is being a pain in the ass. Anyway, but yeah, it's that seems to be the way to do it. They did it in Lord of the Rings, obviously, and yeah, you can say, but they're just doing the books, but still.
I mean, in the Marvel films, if you
Yeah.
take a look at Infinity Wars, we have Tony Stark and Spider-Man doing their thing in space, and we have the rest of the gang on Earth in Africa doing their thing, and we have our crew. You got, as you sort of said, we have a lot of, and that's a great example. You got so many popular characters, even more than even Star Trek movie doing. We have to see. We're paying a lot of money. We want to see Chris Pratt do shit. We want to see Chris Hemsworth do shit. And you give them individual shit to work on, and then you can bring them together at the end to have a big battle scene, and but it works. But it's just became really apparent to me with Trek films because if you look at ones that don't do it very well, like Star Trek V was just awful, and they it's a simple formula, but they could have picked. And I'm glad they picked it up again with this film. To take a step back, as we always do, give people who haven't seen Star Trek VI some context. On the eve of retirement, Kirk and McCoy are charged with assassinating the Klingon High Chancellor and imprisoned. The Enterprise crew must help him escape to thwart a conspiracy aimed at sabotaging the last best hope for peace. Charles tonight is co-starring along with Riley here at my feet. At least he's been quiet.
Come here. Don't be a little shit. Carry on. Sorry.
So as we sort of note here, we're towards the end of their career. They're all looking a lot older in this movie, as one would expect. And there's basically a terrible semi-natural disaster, I guess, in the Klingon Empire, which basically means that the Klingons are going, if something doesn't happen, they're going to be dead in 50 years. The entire race of Klingons will not be able to survive past 50 years due to this disaster, which is actually strangely reminiscent of, again, some later of the Trek films, especially Picard, for example. The Star Trek Picard basically has the same thing happen as their main sort of plot device. Yeah. In the Romulan Empire, in that particular TV show. Kirk and McCoy are sent to escort the Klingon High Commissioner back to Earth, who is going to be taking part in discussions with Starfleet about help.
And of course, tensions are already high because Kirk blames the Klingons for the death of his son.
As well they should, because they actually did kill his son. Real wiggle room about that, right? They did it. Fake news.
I want to recount.
So it's actually kind of interesting to sort of put yourself in the headspace of this film as a Trek fan. 20, 30 years in the future, because the Klingons had been kind of the main sort of bad guys in the series, the TV show, and the movies to that point. They were really a threat. The main threat of those movies, mainly. But in the subsequent 30-odd years since, apart, here and there, they've, generally speaking, been actually part of the Federation. So we had Worf as the main character on a couple of different Star Trek shows. So and Picard actually had a close relationship with the Klingons and worked with them quite regularly. So if you just came in cold on this, you'd be like, hey, hang on a second, why is Kirk being such a bastard about, why is he so suspicious of the Klingons? But again, you kind of got to remember what's happened. See what's happened in the previous 5 movies for it to make sense.
But something that's also nice is Christopher Plummer's character, Chang, and the fact that he kind of steps forward. He's part of the representative for the ambassador, played by David Warner, Chancellor Gorkon. There's an amazing cast in this movie, by the way.
It is an interesting cast, yeah. I mean, we get the standard Trek crew, Shatner, Nimoy, DeForest Kelly, James Doohan, Walter Koenig, Nichelle Nichols, George Takei. I think James Doohan was actually the one that was like, I forgot how much I liked Scotty. Like, he was really good to see him back on screen again. As much as I like Simon Pegg, I don't think he's qualified to carry James Doohan's bags as Scotty. And you got Mark Leonard in there, who I guess could be considered an original cast member, as he always played Sarek, Spock's dad, as well. But you're right. You've also got Kurtwood Smith in there, probably best known for him being on That 70s Show.
Of course. That's exactly where I know him from. It's not his turn as fucking the character's name's gone, but from RoboCop.
Oh, the first place I think of him is That 70s Show, because it was on TV for so long. Like, I mean,
I never ever watched That 70s Show.
I didn't watch it either, but it's a meme now, right? Like, I
look at his picture and instantly I hear him say, "Well, give the man a hand."
It's like, I'm going to put my butt up your ass, or whatever it is he says in that show. Anyway, you're right. We've also got Christopher Plummer, as you mentioned, Michael Dorn, who played Worf in Star Trek Next Generation and on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Interestingly, Christian Slater, a cameo he got paid $750 for, and apparently he framed a check. Iman, probably best known for being married to David Bowie. Sorry.
True. It's true. And of course, our connective tissue of Kim Cattrall.
And a really weird sort of role when you look at her and go, she's best known now for her role on Sex and the City.
Yeah.
To being whatever character, was it Samantha? I can't remember.
Yes.
I think I was subjected to a couple of seasons of it at one point in time.
Yes, her name is Samantha.
And she has a particular, a very sort of, amorous character on that show. But if we go back again to what she was in Big Trouble in Little China, where she pulled off a very funny role brilliantly. And again, I thought she was very effective as a Vulcan in Star Trek 6. It's just it's a bit of a shame her career in cinema didn't seem to really take off, particularly after this. And she kind of disappeared until the late 90s when that TV show came along.
Yeah. But going back to my point is the juxtaposition of the character of Chang to Kirk and how Chang knows about Kirk. There is this, much as there is the notoriety of the Klingons throughout the Empire as having been the big bad for so long, Chang is kind of almost like salivating at the idea of locking heads and locking horns with Kirk, who's this kind of almost like seems to be a bit of a mythical figure amongst the Klingon Empire, which is great because they did butt heads so much. And it's nice to have that little nod to the continuity, and shit goes on beyond the scope of the camera in this universe. It's great.
I guess it is in a way. I mean, but maybe considered a little risky as well, in the sense that I guess if you're making the sixth film in a franchise,
you've got a bit of license.
You've got a bit of license to incorporate a bit of lore into your story. But I think today they might be a little reluctant to really draw on that too much. In a sense, like even beyond it, kind of drawing on the TV show's lore as well. Like, I mean, there are 3 seasons of Kirk going head to head with the Klingons on the TV show as well. Yeah. So, but I think they'd be reluctant to do that today on a possibility of making it sort of people who haven't seen the TV show or maybe haven't seen the other films. Yeah. They would be worried about, alienating that audience if you drew too heavily on it. But I think you're right. We probably at this point they had the license to pull it off. But I can't think of what Kirk would surely be a legendary figure in space. Because of his, the things he came up with. I mean, the 4th film, he traveled back in time and brought whales back. I mean, like that's got to get
just so stupid, no matter how you say it.
If that doesn't get you your own reality TV show, even in the Federation, I don't know what does. Like
it's just a stupid plot device.
It seemed like a good idea at the time, I'm sure. But it would be absolutely every reason for them to be well known throughout the known universe
without spending any time on actually explaining it. It's just you're either going to get this or you're not. And Christopher Plummer is such a good actor anyway that he's able to just depict this. I know who you are, and I want to play mind games with you, and it just works. It establishes his character. It instantly establishes a confrontation between these two, which unlike so many movies nowadays, especially ones that are tagged with action, those two characters don't exactly have action sequences together. I mean, you can't really at the point where they're older guys. Yes, you can do it, but it's never going to be as cathartic and impressive as you really want it to be because they are old guys. They have limitations. So
And
to have them as these characters just in more of a psychological, mental combat that is engaging and interesting and compelling, kudos to them.
Absolutely. And to sort of go back to it again, it's something they've done. It's actually a very effective formula in the Trek films. If you go back to something like Wrath of Khan, which is generally acknowledged as being the best, I didn't enjoy it as much as The Voyage Home, but anyway, that great battle of wits between Khan and Kirk, is the highlight of the story.
Yeah.
It's not, I think that's what I think separated the films from a TV show. The TV show was kind of a space western.
Yeah.
For want of a better term. Like, that's really what it was. Like, Kirk could be beating the shit out of somebody in every episode, taking his shirt off.
Yeah.
He's pretty much the Hulk Hogan,
and he's cooking out.
And so, it'd be cooking out would be kind of like overacting, wouldn't it? Like pronouncing every word as if it's a word on its own. But like there was a lot of those sort of stupid, sort of really lame fights.
Yeah,
became famous for TV show. Was famous for it. And it's kind of campy fun now. But the films kind of did away with that a lot. I mean, there's a little bit of a fight scene in this one, which is okay. But the actual main action wasn't two guys punching each other in the face. It was, it was a battle of wits between characters, and in space. It's kind of what we wanted from, our Trek. Our Trek really was a bit of exploration, a bit of action. Then you got your movie to go along with it. I think that's one of many things that's missing from Trek today. Is it's just that battle of wits is kind of gone, and it's all action all the time.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that really highlights for me the Undiscovered Country and the Wrath of Khan as the two best of all Star Trek movies, because they do essentially what the Marvel movies are doing now, where they go, all right, we want to do a buddy cop movie, but we're just going to transplant the cops with Thor and Hulk. The Wrath of Khan is a submarine movie. That's basically what it is. It's an espionage submarine movie. And the fact that there is that wonderful moment where Kirk realizes Khan has been in isolation for so long. He is not thinking in 4 dimensions for the battle map. That's brilliant.
Well, that's it. He's not a spacefaring guy. He's not experienced in space combat. So that's the kicker in that one.
And then this one, The Undiscovered Country, is a Cold War spy movie.
It really is, in the sense that there are actual serious nods in there for the history nerds, apart from the fact that it came out in 1991, which was right in the middle of after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the Soviet Union dissolved at the end of that year in 1991. In particular, the one that always notable to me in a scene where during a trial with Kirk and McCoy, when Chang yells a question and he sort of demands, "Don't wait for the translation." Which is actually it's reminiscent of a scene at the UN of an exchange between the US UN ambassador and the Soviet ambassador about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Which is based Adlai Stevenson said that don't pay for the transfer. It was a really famous sort of moment from the history of the Cold War. So they're not actually disguising it particularly well. It's very much in your face. Even to me now, because I'm a history nerd, but in 1991 it would have been really in your face because it was such a
it was very present
moment. And I've always felt. I don't know if I've actually read this anywhere. It's just something I came up with myself because Roddenberry was a veteran. He served in the Second World War in the Pacific, if I'm not mistaken. He flew planes. And I've always felt a little bit like Tolkien. He served in the First World War, if I'm not mistaken, or at least the books were written around that time. And you can if you look at it through that lens, you can kind of see, maybe the Germans are the orcs, and yada yada yada. You can see the influence of the world around him in that war in those books. And I think you can see the influence of Roddenberry's service in early Trek. I think the Klingons, are meant to be, the Germans, the Japanese. I think so warlike and honor bound, and the Romulans are very, sort of sly and conniving. Probably your Germans. I feel like there's a lot of that's World War II, Cold War era stuff in the original Trek. So it's nothing new to them to actually use it in those real world events in the film, as it turned out. And I think it sort of fits the time. If you're old enough like me, like you remember, where you were brought up to think of the Russians as like this omnipresent threat. I wasn't exactly ducking under a table like American kids were, but you remember thinking
the way that the Russians were portrayed in every movie is this indomitable monster, whether it's an individual person, like anytime Arnold Schwarzenegger was playing a Russian having to work in the US, or it was Dolph Lundgren in Rocky, or any time, they were just this machine that was powerful, and everyone who went up against them was the underdog. That's how they were perceived every single time.
And that's how the Klingons were sort of portrayed as being this, unremitting, force of, brutality and danger. And as I said, I feel like the film, you don't get that from the film anymore because, again, the 30 years of Trek since has kind of really undermined that. But at the time, it really worked. And if you go back to the start, if you watch them, watch the 6 films in a row, you can definitely understand Kirk and Spock's mindset in it. Nice. It was nice to see Michael Dorn pop up, and he's actually canon in the sense that that's actually Worf's dad.
I think it's grandfather.
Grandfather. He's Colonel Worf, but he's actually a predecessor of or an ancestor of Michael Dorn's character on Star Trek: Next Generation. It's worth remembering that Star Trek: Next Generation started filming in 1987, which came out in 1987. So we were 4 seasons in to that when this one came out. So it kind of makes sense that you go, we got a Klingon character now. Let's write a cool backstory for him.
Yeah, absolutely. But they do it in a really good way. I just think that this movie is kind of like a lot of Star Trek. I feel like this is kind of the last great Star Trek movie, and I know that a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, the original, the Kelvin universe Star Trek was really good," and it was really solid, but it didn't say much. These are movies that were trying to say something, and I don't think you really get that. Going back to my point from earlier about franchises and this vacuous space that space movies franchises don't really have, we're still in that same damn spot where, unless it's Star Trek or Star Wars, there's no new franchises based in space. And I feel like it's because the only place that people feel comfortable in doing more allusions to modern current affairs in space is in TV shows like Battlestar Galactica. Like I was watching it before, there was more connection to the politics and things like that. And it seems like give them 22 episodes and we can go into that more and we can invest more into that. But for movies, it's like, no, we want flashbangs, we want excitement, we want thrills. We don't want a political or a thought-provoking movie based in space where there's the potential for action, but we're not going to do that. We're going to tell a different story. It seems like there seems to be a hard line between the mediums for sci-fi, space sci-fi on TV versus space sci-fi in movies. And it's a real shame because you could get so much interesting stuff.
Well, I mean, I think it's true. We've talked about this ad nauseum. Like, you basically can't get a movie made these days unless you're Christopher Nolan or Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah.
You can't get a film made unless it has a brand name attached to it.
Yeah.
A book,
true.
a TV show, a remake, a reboot, a sequel, a prequel, based on
Reimagining.
based on a board game, based on a TV show, based on a video game,
Yeah.
it needs to have a brand name attached to get your. We talked again a lot. We talked about the Joe Rogan interview from a couple of years ago with Guy Ritchie talking about getting his King Arthur film, made in the Nightmare. That was an established, successful director.
Yeah,
and Guy Ritchie trying to get again a pretty well known fairy tale, the King Arthur story, and he couldn't. He had to basically take the release date he was given rather than the one he wanted because you're not part of an established franchise. So you like just feel lucky you got the money to make your film at all.
Yeah.
So, and I think in the world of science fiction, because they're generally speaking expensive to make, you kind of need to have that brand name on the front to actually get it made. I mean, the other thing here, apparently they're making a sequel to The Last Starfighter now. 35 years after the original. Yay.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's just I guess a genre that is fraught with danger.
Now, I'm not saying that because I can already hear people saying, "Oh, but there are sci-fi movies that go into more of that cerebral stuff," and that's absolutely true. You look at space-based stuff like Moon. We both love fucking Moon. It's an awesome thing, but it is by design. It's trying to be this very isolated story about one guy who is on his own, and that is the story of it. Gravity, all of these things. Any movie that you come up with, it's not trying to actually open up any form of universe or even a solar system where things take place. It seems like they're afraid to expand beyond the one spaceship to tell
also, I mean, Moon was a low budget indie film. I mean, if you've got a low budget indie film you can make for $1 million or something.
Yeah.
And again, I think that was British. So I think that was funded by, the lottery in England. When you buy lottery tickets, that goes into a fund that sort of helps pay for film.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, they have a little logo at the end. This film was funded with stuff from the lottery,
for tax purposes.
Gravity had 2 major stars attached and a very famous director. The Martian had a major star or 2 attached. It had it also had a very successful director, Ridley Scott, and it was a very successful book. So it got past the no sci-fi rule. Otherwise, you're right. It tends to end up on television now.
Yeah. All right, so I directed us here, courtesy of Kim Cattrall and Big Trouble in Little China, with a plethora of people. Where are we going next?
It's not hard to take us somewhere interesting. And I did consider following Kurtwood Smith to RoboCop, but we've watched a Verhoeven film this year, so I wanted to take us to something completely different, a different director. A different style of director, and I think a film that will give you lots of opportunities to go other places because again, it's a film with an amazing cast.
Okay,
and that film is Inside Man from 2006, and we are following Christopher Plummer to Inside Man.
Yes,
Arthur Case in Inside Man. Inside Man, of course, directed by Spike Lee.
Good call. Apparently, they're making a sequel to that movie as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've seen this film a few times, and so I'm being a bit selfish because I really, really love this film. I think it's very clever, and I think it's also very different for someone like Spike Lee is well known for directing a particular kind of film, and Inside Man isn't it. But I think it's he goes and shows he can do this kind of film very well. And amazing cast: Denzel Washington, Clive Owen, Jodie Foster, Christopher Plummer, Willem Dafoe, Chiwetel Ejiofor. And of course, as I said, directed by Spike Lee, who's directed a number of very, very successful films over the last 30 years. So I think it'll. I don't want to back you into a corner. I think you've.
No, I mean it's there. There are more than a few good options that we can go to,
And
as well as a couple of bad ones if I really wanted to.
Very, very bad ones. And you can't be as bad as Death Machine. That's just
That's true. There is a new benchmark.
That is and that's an unfortunate one. That one, but I mean, Chiwetel. I mean, I'm just saying, Chiwetel Ejiofor wasn't Serenity.
Wait, what?
Chiwetel Ejiofor wasn't Serenity.
Yes, he was. Yes. I thought you said wasn't in Serenity.
Wasn't Serenity.
Like, wait, what?
Planting with Seed. Playing it. Anyway, so that's going to be next week's chain movie will be Side Man, and that's generally speaking a pleasure to watch.
Yes, absolutely. Now, as we are kind of finishing off of Star Trek, do you mind if I just give my thoughts on the other Star Trek movies?
Please. I'd be interested to hear it.
Okay, so as I said at the top of the show, I watched this and then I decided to go into Generations, and First Contact, Insurrection, and then I went up to Nemesis. And the overall thing that I found is a increasing lack of identity. And it's really, really bizarre because, as I said before, Star Trek Generations kind of feels like 3 episodes merged together as a bridge to introduce the next generation to the cinema rather than just the small screen. And much like Firefly, as the movie Serenity coming from Firefly, the characters pre-existing, they know how to be these characters, they know how to do it all, and they translate that well. So if you are a fan of the Next Generation show, Star Trek Generations, you're probably going to enjoy, because they're just carrying on the characters. It's like a spin-off, separate storyline for the series, which is fine. It doesn't really do anything exciting, but then it suddenly feels like a weird shift going to First Contact, particularly for Jean-Luc Picard. Because in many ways, we get what we were talking about in the Undiscovered Country of the ramifications and the repercussions of events from the TV show or previous movies affecting the character. And in this case, it is Jean-Luc Picard effectively suffering from sporadic forms of PTSD. And from when he was assimilated by the Borg, which happened in the show. And you get enough story exposition to explain that, and you don't really need to go much further than it.
So it is a bold choice, again, considering it's based on an episode of a TV show, which probably even less people would be familiar with.
Yeah. So it was a bold choice, but it gave Jean-Luc Picard a real... By the end of it, especially the confrontation with the Borg Queen and how things go with that and the development of the story, it kind of felt like they went, all right, let's get Jean-Luc Picard and throw in about 60% of John McClane from Die Hard 1. It's weird. They try and make him more of this action guy
which is certainly true. And if you were interested in the topic, the Red Letter Media guys, Mr. Plinkett, have you seen any of that stuff on YouTube? You've got to watch it. You're absolutely missing out. You've got to watch it. Especially his Star Wars. His one in the Phantom Menace was where he made his name.
Okay.
I'll find the link and I'll send it to you later. Like, trust me, it's so good. He just nails it. But the guy behind Red Letter Media, there's a couple of guys that do a few different things, but he does a character called Mr. Plinkett, which is kind of funny. And he sort of watches these films and sort of deconstructs them. And they did Star Trek, the First Contact, and they make a juxtaposition between Picard's actions in that movie of where he's, as you sort of said, an action hero. And then they contrast that to moments from a TV show where Picard was a completely different character. Picard was essentially a pacifist, and at every possible opportunity would look at options for dialogue and ways they could sort of work together to come to an understanding, and violence and combat and kind of thing were his last resort.
Yeah,
on any number of different occasions. They get it's overwhelming the amount of the sort of things that they sort of cite. They go, well, here he is acting like John McClane and machine gunning Borg on the holodeck in First Contact, and here's a whole bunch of other examples from the show where he was a completely different character, would never have done something like that. So you are right, but his actions in First Contact are completely out of character with the character.
Yeah, and it seems really strange because he is largely partnered up with one of the humans from in the past, because for those who don't know, the Borg travel back in time intent on preventing Earth's first contact with an alien species. Captain Picard and his crew pursue them to ensure that Zephram Cochrane makes his maiden flight reaching warp speed. So they go down to the planet at some point, and where is she? Yes, Alfie Woodard, who is a face that you kind of go, oh, I know her from shit. She's fucking in everything. She seems to be the overall depiction of humans when the Enterprise goes back to them is generally kind of post-apocalyptic-esque, bit brutish, and yet she being very, very aggressive and determined to kind of get through everything. She becomes the voice of reason to Picard, and it just feels such a betrayal of the character of Picard that we have been privy to for all this time, and especially to Patrick Stewart, because he's not exactly well known for being that very aggressive, action-orientated guy.
That said, though, I feel like that where this does kind of hold up, you're correct, is that PTSD can change people.
Yeah.
And, it is basically a form of trauma. And you and I both are advocates for men's mental health. And I think people are a little hard on the film for that reason. Like, oh, he said all his shit 10 years ago that completely doesn't correspond to his actions in First Contact. But after what happened to him, that can explain his actions in the film, especially considering the people he's acting as violent towards are Borg, which would quite easily trigger that PTSD. So how often do you hear about the story about, the guy who was perfectly quiet, normal person, he goes off to war, comes back completely different.
I just feel like you don't get quite enough of it. You only really get people really questioning it from Beverly Crusher and interactions with Worf, where they have a very heated debate, and he just basically tells Worf to fuck off.
And that's one of the best scenes in the film. It's like, if you were any other man, I would kill you where you stand.
Yeah, it's a great scene, and they could have invested more time in it, but they don't, because they want to have more of the action stuff, which the action overall, it's not bad. It's not bad at all, but it's just the weaker side of the story. And then talking about weaker side of the story, what the hell is going on with Commander Riker in this movie? He's just so laid back, and it's not as if the future of the human race and many other races in all existence of this, like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to trundle into this old-timey bar where my sort of relationship partner is very drunk on the job and not going to have any kind of reprimand. It's like, I'm just going to laugh at you because you're drunk. Really?
I think you're being very, very harsh in this film. It's like, I think this is far and away the best next-gen film.
That's easy to say.
It is, because the rest weren't great. But that said, I would pop this in the top 3 Trek films. And I can't really disagree with anything you're saying there. And it Picard, is, as I said, despite the fact that I think we need to take into account his PTSD, he really is acting a little out of character here. And he didn't act like this before. He didn't act like this again afterwards. Yeah. But my God, it's a fucking entertaining movie.
Absolutely. In its own little bubble, it's It's actually quite good, and I feel like they missed an opportunity to be able to call back to this either in the show or in follow-up movies. But it kind of feels like watching Tony Stark's Iron Man character,
Just to
where
note that the TV show was finished when it's made.
yeah, but well, the character of Picard came back to TV.
We don't talk about that.
But you know, we both like Iron Man 3 because it actually has repercussions for Tony Stark, and he has to deal with, once again, PTSD. But it never gets brought up again, and it feels like a disservice to the character development over this multi-year.
I would tend to agree. I think you're 100% right in that sense. They did miss an opportunity to try and build on this in future films. I don't understand why they didn't, because this was very successful and much loved by fans at the time. And you know, hypercritical fans came later who pointed all this stuff out, which you can't disagree with. But Jonathan Frakes does a great job directing, and maybe that's why he was so chilled out, is because the director wanted to make it cool. But you know, like you're right, they really did set up. I mean, it is a fairly self-contained story. But I'm not saying you should necessarily have set up a sequel. But you know, to come back to the original series films, there are Star Trek 2, 3, and 4 are an arc.
Yeah.
They are all part of the same. They're not sequels necessarily, but they are an arc. I mean, they are sequels in 2, 3, and 4. But, you know,
but they continue.
It's a story. It's not like it's a new story in each one of them. But the stuff that happens in Star Trek 2 directly leads to what happens in Star Trek 3. But when I say it's not a sequel, it's not a continuation of the same story. Yeah,
it's
in a way,
say the characters continue and cause and effect.
The Matrix films, it's one story, 3 films, really. I mean, it really just continued Neo's story through Reloaded and Revelations, or whatever it was called. But it's the same. It's actions in number 10, Rafa Khan set up the search for Spock. Because of course Spock dies at the end of the second one. Spoilers. And then of course when Sarek comes to Kirk in the third one and goes, "Why did you shoot him off into space? He's still alive." And then you got to go look for him. You're like, "Oh, he's dead." You know,
that's the best way of telling that story.
Yeah. And then of course,
I've come to collect my boy. What do you mean you put him in the trash compactor?
He's still alive. I'll be right back. You just sit there.
He's on a nice, pleasurable cruise.
He's in Tahiti. So, you know, and then the fourth one's a bit weaker, but then again, the actions of number 3 do directly lead to number 4 in the sense that number 4 picks up where 3 left off in the Klingon Warbird and yada, yada, yada. So we have that, but Spock is still not quite himself. So Spock is still learning how to be part human again. So we have a 3-film arc, which is really nice because you don't get that often. Like where you in the middle of a franchise of films. I mean, the Fast and Furious films, as far as I know, are individual stories. I mean, the Marvel films are usually individual stories. Of course, they've got connective tissue between the two of them, but it's not the story isn't an arc necessarily. So that was really nice. It would have been, as you sort of know, a wonderful opportunity with this essentially set up their next gen movie universe beautifully in First Contact. It was fun and successful. And then they just sort of go and made Insurrection, which was like...
Yeah, which, looking at the story of Insurrection, if Picard had still been learning to evolve, having to deal with PTSD throughout this movie, that would have made it way more interesting, especially...
Maybe he steps down at the end of First Contact and he gets hauled before... like the psych board or something like that.
Yeah.
And they're like, sorry, we really appreciate everything you've done for the universe, but you're just not right in the head to be flying our flagship in a battle anymore. And shit happens, and all of a sudden he's got to come out of retirement to go back to, it writes itself.
You get one moment of that story possibly having been a consideration at the start of Insurrection, because for those who don't know, Star Trek Insurrection is when the crew of the Enterprise learn of a Federation conspiracy against the inhabitants of a unique planet. Captain Picard begins an open rebellion. That is boiling this story down really, really simply, because it's an unusual story, and it could have been really compelling because it seems like Data invades this community and reveals that this community is being watched, and there's a bit of dialogue with, I'm just going to find his name, Anthony Zerbe, who plays Commander Doherty. He's like Picard's superior, and he effectively tells him, no, we don't need the Enterprise here because you are in our most powerful ship. You need to be over there doing observations. It's sort of like, no, let's keep Picard away. There was a nugget of a story there that they didn't bother going into at all. It's a real shame they missed it. And then they deliver this weird, lackluster story, which has got F. Murray Abrams in it, who is pretty good overall. Weird, but it's a weird character. It's lots of interesting ideas if any of them had been given an opportunity to grow and develop, but none of them are. It's a hodgepodge.
And it's weak, and then it just gets worse with Star Trek Nemesis, which I think is really, really one of the strange choices. I don't know if we talked about this when we talked about Picard when it came out earlier in the year. One of the really strange choices about that show in a world of strange choices that was Picard.
Yeah.
Why would you choose to go, okay, we want to tell a story about Picard. Let's carry on the story from Star Trek Nemesis, which nobody saw. And those of us that did see it have spent the next 18 years trying to black it out of our memories because it sucked. The only notable thing about it was it had Tom Hardy in it, a very young Tom Hardy.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that Picard was going to be basically a continuation of Nemesis. And I kind of like, stuff's happening in Picard. I'm like, I don't remember what happened in Nemesis because it was bloody almost 20 years ago, and I haven't really been motivated to go and see it again.
Yeah, but going back to our kind of 3-story arc, the PTSD from First Contact into Insurrection, where he is learning to control it, and then coming into Nemesis, where he is seeing a cloned younger version of himself. He could be the wise version, and the thing that connects him, the moral difficulty that he has fighting this guy, is I see so much of myself, I see the dark path you're going down, and they tease little bits of it through Nemesis, and it's never fully fleshed out. You never get real good character conversation about, I've been where you have been, and I have been there very fucking recently. I know the darkness that you're going through. There's not that weight or gravitas to any of the conversation in any of the following movies. It's like, oh, come on, this is supposed to be, especially when you look at the stuff that's in the Kelvin universe, where Star Trek, the Federation, is consistently they're trying to push it and be more of a military function rather than the peacekeeping and science division of it. It's like, okay, overall it kind of tells a story, but it's half baked and there's holes and it backsteps a lot. It's so frustrating.
I think what you're pointing out there is that Trek's become, in a way, well before Star Wars, lazy. Yeah. They write lazy stories. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at the trivia of Insurrection, there's an interesting little plot thingy here. According to a leaked manuscript, fade in the writing of Star Trek Insurrection. Initial concepts of the movie were far removed from the final product. The first treatment, called Star Trek Stardust, involved Picard and his crew. I think Star Trek Stardust, I think when I see Picard and his crew are forced to become male strippers, a la, like the full Monty.
Magic Mike in space.
Magic Mike in space. Star Trek Stardust, that's what it sounds like to me, but no. Involved Picard and a fellow cadet named Hugh Duffy, who were friends at Academy, meeting up almost 3 decades later because of different circumstances. Duffy has become a renegade who has tried to provoke a war between the Federation and the Romulan Empire, and Picard must travel to the neutral zone to bring him back. Picard eventually finds Duffy and risks his career to help the other officer thwart a plan by the Romulans to take over a planet housing the Fountain of Youth. At the end, Picard gets arrested and stripped of his rank by Starfleet due to his actions during the movie. This plot was similar to Heart of Darkness, or Apocalypse Now, and featured numerous references to various episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now that sounds badass.
Yeah.
That would have been a ballsy, tough call to make. And yeah, went lazy, and
they didn't.
They've paid the price, and then they've done the same thing. I mean, they did the Abrams effect. in the Kelvinverse. The first one was kind of good because it kind of went back to basics and did that well enough. And then as soon as we needed to go, okay, you've done the basics well, we now need you to move it to intermediate and advanced, please, Mr. Abrams.
Yeah.
He's sort of gone, I've got other things to do over there. I'll just leave this in the capable hands of Damon Lindelof and other people who the guy directed the Fast and Furious movies that I gave Star Trek Beyond to. And they'll have motorcycles and we'll make my own Star Trek with blackjack and hookers.
I'm going to defeat all these people by playing the Beastie Boys.
And like, hey, that was a cool idea 2 movies ago. Remember that? Let's do it again. No. So I think everyone knows my opinion of Discovery, and I think it's poor. I think Picard is poor. When the best thing you've come up with is a Rick and Morty light animated version of Star Trek and Star Trek Below Decks. It's the best thing you've done.
Yep.
I don't have high hopes for it to come out of this death spiral anytime soon.
Yeah, and they've tried the reboot option and it hasn't worked. I just don't know if there is much life left in Trek.
I think, right now, they seem very happy with Secret Hideout. That's the company who are making the production company who are making it these days.
Right. Yeah.
Who have got Discovery, Picard, Below Decks, the other one with Captain Pike in it, where No Man's Gone Before, or whatever it's called.
Yep. And they've got the Janeway one as well.
The Janeway one, which is Star Trek Genesis, I think, which is another animated series. So it's 5 different series. Show me another property where they've got 5 different TV series either being made or in development. And there's also technically, they've talked about one on Section 31, which is like the secret police in Starfleet. They've talked about doing a series on that. They've talked about doing one with Captain Georgiou, who's a character in Discovery. I think both of those are on the shelf for now.
Yeah.
So they've got a lot of ideas, and they're sort of throwing stuff against the wall. None of it's really stuck right now. But, so somebody's giving them money to make this shit. So they're obviously fairly happy with what's happening in that space at the moment at Paramount and CBS or whoever it is that owns it. The only thing that for me, and I'm going to put my fanboy hat firmly on my head,
Tarantino
is the Tarantino script.
Yep.
There's a couple of movies kicking around. There's the Noah Hawley script that apparently was about a virus, which, it's probably not something I want to be making right now.
But it could be like what we were talking about before of bringing current issues into that sci-fi space. You can play with it in, putting current affairs or politics into a sci-fi environment. It's almost like, you can hit each other with sticks as long as you do it in the foam pit because it's still mildly safe.
Whether or not we don't know what's happening, COVID's kind of put everything on the back burner. He apparently was the favorite in the sense that was a script they were going to go ahead with, I heard. The Tarantino script, who knows what the hell's happening with it, but apparently they have one. Apparently it exists. I don't think Quentin was ever going to direct it. That's certainly not the indication going around, but I would be fascinated to see what he did with that property. So, and I think that would be a bold choice.
I think that's what Star Trek really needs, especially in the cinema space. If they want to re-enter the cinema space, they need to do something very bold and very, very different to what they have served up. Because financially and critically, the last movies have not done enough.
Well, that's why Christopher Pine and Zachary Quinto and those guys, they had, and I think Chris Hemsworth had a pay-or-play deal, if I'm not mistaken. That's the word on the street. They got paid to make a 4th Kelvinverse film, which is going to follow Star Trek Beyond, and they got paid, and the film never got made. It was going to revolve around George Kirk's character from the first one, because Chris Hemsworth's a star now. So I don't know how the hell they were going to put that all together, but they got paid a bunch of money to basically sit at home and do nothing, which must feel really good as an actor. Paid to do nothing.
Especially during COVID, it's like, hey, I got paid to do a movie that isn't actually happening when I can't do movies.
I think there's a temptation to go back to those guys again because, again, you don't have to. They've sort of built a bit of, credibility, or people we know these characters now. And I thought Christopher Pine, I really enjoyed that crew. I thought they were all great in their roles, especially Carl Urban as Bones. He was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be tempting to go back to those guys. And if you had a script by Quentin Tarantino, God, I have no idea why you wouldn't use that. I mean, the only thing I can think of is that, like, again, it's a bit like in the Star Wars world at the moment, you got Kathleen Kennedy, and if it's not really what she wants to be doing, then it just kind of doesn't get done, unless The Mandalorian got made. So I don't think it's a Disney, like, going Disney coming in going, hello, we'd really like our stuff to make money, please. So just get lost with your shitty films. We'd have a TV show over here that everyone wants to see.
Of course, there is another little cog in the continuation of the Kelvin universe. Is Anton Yelchin is no longer with us, sadly, and so they would either recast Chekhov, or or they would have to shake up the quote unquote OG team with a new person. It's weird because, you know, when you think of the characters of Kirk, of Spock, of Bones, of Scotty, you think of all of them as a team. You don't think, oh, Kirk, Spock, and Phil.
I think so. Like, you know, I think there's lots of creative ways you could handle it, right? I mean, you know, they'd probably do something really fucking stupid, like gender bend it by going, it's Chekhov's sister, Irina. You know, diversity. You know, but
we forgot to tell you in the other movies, but this version of Chekhov was actually in a transsexual relationship with a robot, and this is going to be continuation.
Exactly right. You know, that would be what they would probably do, because they're a bunch of idiots. You could do something really interesting, right? Like,
and it would be a great way of doing something, like I said before, something bold, because you are literally injecting a new person into the mix, this core mix.
It doesn't even necessarily have to be a new person. Trekkies like me really enjoy those connections. Like we said, Michael Dorn's character in this film was related to Worf in the other series. That's really cool. You know, there's a Klingon translator in this film who was a captain in Star Trek V who attacked Kirk, who's now been demoted.
That's right.
So, you know, I like those little connections that these are characters who we know about, like George Kirk in the Kelvinverse film. That was a cool little addition. We hadn't seen George Kirk before. So what if it was something like Wesley Crusher's grandfather? And, you know, like, you could get Will Wheaton involved. I don't know, Will want to do it. I mean, it'd be kind of funny. Maybe you don't want Will in your movie because it'd be a little bit too in your face, but, like, you know, but like there's a notable character we know about. You know, or you could, shudder to say it, you could connect to Discovery because they're kind of in the same universe as the Enterprise. So, you know,
second cousin to Michael Burnham.
Something like that. You're like Bruce Burnham, right? Or something, I don't know.
No, that's worse than my film.
We are long overdue for an Australian character in these films. Yeah, on screen, Struth Captain, doing his bloody best
on the starboard bow.
Joe Courtney, that's it. Joe Courtney. He could do his Captain Boomerang thing. He'd be like, Struth these fucking Klingon cunts, mate.
No, if we're gonna put an Aussie on the deck, then it has to be the Tarantino script with Tarantino doing his Aussie accent.
No, that doesn't. That's fortunately, like I said, Quentin apparently doesn't want to be involved, but hopefully, I think the script exists, so that would be. I mean, look, even if they never make it, I hope we get to see it one day, and hope it gets leaked.
I would actually love if Tarantino does actually retire from making films. I would love him to just release books that are his incomplete scripts or something like that, just collections. Because, like, the Vega Boys, his Kill Bill 3, so many other projects that he's always kind of gone, this is it, and he's just got to go, boom, this is it.
I think he's talked about writing. I think he's talked about writing books when he retires from filmmaking. So maybe he will. Maybe that's the way he would consider. He's got a head full of ideas, you know. So maybe it's short stories. I don't know, comic books. Shit.
I've got to write children's novels.
I mean, that would be hilarious, you know. You know, Kill Bill.
Baby's first fuck.
You know, the baby Vega brothers. You know, that it's like Muppet Babies meets Pulp Fiction. It writes itself.
We have so many good ideas on this show.
I should send him an email. But I mean, who knows what it like? Apparently, it was going to be set in the gangsters period or something. Be a gangster movie. Like, I would love to see it. I think that's what they need to do. We've talked a lot about Trek for a show that's not about Trek. Should we move on?
Let's move on. I want to hear your thoughts on the trial of the Chicago 7.
Yeah, so I watched this this week. It is on Netflix. It's a Netflix exclusive around the joint. So probably if it's here, if you're overseas, probably where you'll find it. And this film is based on the story of the 7 people on trial stemming from various charges surrounding the uprising at the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, Illinois. This film is written by, directed by Aaron Sorkin. If you don't know who Aaron Sorkin is, why the fuck are you listening to his podcast?
We are very much fans.
And he's just super famous. So he wrote The West Wing. He wrote The Social Network. He wrote A Few Good Men. He wrote The Newsroom. I think he wrote Moneyball, Charlie Wilson's War. He's one of the best writers in Hollywood, if not the best. I'm not sure about the best director because he directed this as well. He's not commonly known for being a director. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's the second film he's directed. He directed Molly's Game in 2017, which is an excellent film, by the way. If you haven't seen it,
that's another Netflix exclusive, I think.
I'm not sure. Maybe it's on Netflix, but it's a wonderful film if you haven't seen it. So I recommend that one as well. But this one, he wrote and directed for Netflix. Now, the cast here is really strong. So we have Eddie Redmayne, Sacha Baron Cohen, Mark Rylance, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Frank Langella, Michael Keaton. And those are just the names I actually know. We've also got some lesser-known actors in here. Alex Sharp, Jeremy Strong. John Carroll Lynch is a name you probably won't know, but you'll know his face.
Yeah.
He's in heaps of stuff. You got Yaha Abdul-Mateen II as well. He's fantastic in this.
Most people will probably know him from his turn in Aquaman as Black Manta.
That's right. I knew his face from somewhere. And
he was one variation of Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen.
The movie?
No, the TV series.
TV show. So really, really strong cast here. Now, I think the main creative force behind getting this done was Sacha Baron Cohen, if I'm not mistaken. This was queued up a few years ago for Spielberg to make. But I think the writer's strike kind of kicked that in the ass back in the late 2000s. It's been kicking around Hollywood for a while, and it finally got it made. So 1968, let's put our heads on with our history nerd hats on, our fanboy hat off, history nerd hat on. The Vietnam War is raging. President Lyndon Johnson in 1968 decides not to nominate to run for election again. He could have run for election again for another 4 years, but decides not to because he's probably going to get absolutely pants because the war is incredibly unpopular. And in the end, the election is won by Richard Nixon. So leading up to the 1968 election, there is the Democratic National Convention where they nominate their candidate for president. Is held in Chicago. They end up nominating Hubert Humphrey. But it's a really sort of weird turn of events. Like in 1968, the Democrats, which is seen as the party of war, and the target of massive fury and outrage from young Americans and people who oppose the Vietnam War. So all these people congregate in Chicago hoping to protest the convention, and it turns out to be a police riot. And I use that advice, like a police riot is a thing. The police go nuts and beat the shit out of these people and for protesting, largely peacefully against the war and to protest the Democrats' involvement in the war. Fast forward after about a year or after the actual election's taken place, and Richard Nixon has absolutely pants Hubert Humphrey and is now the president. He instructs his Justice Department to basically go after the organizers of the protests in Chicago. Probably the most notable and well-known of those being Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin played in this one, but Abby Hoffman's played by Sacha Baron Cohen. Jerry Rubin's played by Jeremy Strong. Really good Jeremy Strong. I was looking at him going, man, he's so good. How do I not know his face? He's in stuff, but he's in Succession, which I don't watch. Maybe that's what, but like he's been in very much, but he's a wonderful actor. So to keep an eye. I mean, I say he's not been in much. He's been in films like Molly's Game. He was in Detroit, Selma, The Big Short, Zero Dark 30, Lincoln. He's been in some big movies, okay, but like he's not exactly headlining these films, but he's very, very good as Jerry Rubin. Now here we run into, I guess, one of the weaknesses of the film. History nerd here, right? Like I studied US history, quite a bit, especially history of the 60s, being a very interesting time. I'm vaguely familiar with what happened in this trial. I'm vaguely familiar with what happened in Chicago that year. Vaguely familiar with Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin more by name than actually by their actions and the stuff they actually did. If you don't know who they are, if you don't know what happened in Chicago in the 60s, you might struggle to really connect with this film in the sense that, like, the character early in the film says he's hey, we didn't really do much of this protest. Why are we here being arrested? Why are we being charged with this crime? And the other one of them says, someone answers him by going, this is the Academy Awards of protests. I'm just glad to be nominated. It's kind of it is kind of sort of the RuPaul's Drag Race of counterculture figures from the 1960s. These guys were like the leading countercultural figures of their age. Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin by far and away the most famous, but people in here like Eddie Redmayne plays a guy named Tom Hayden, who ended up being a legislator, a politician in California. 6 times he was elected. So if you don't know who these people are, like, you're not really given a very good introduction about who they are.
Okay.
Right? You kind of just gone, these people are on trial. They're well-known agitators. You can kind of put that together from what they're saying. I mean, for example, there are cutaway scenes quite regularly where Abby Hoffman's kind of doing stand-up shows in a club. So you just kind of get the impression that, well, he's obviously people pay to go and see him talk. You know, who is he? Is he a comedian? Is he, we never really given an idea of who these people are, just that they're on trial for, this organizing this massive protest.
Yeah.
And I can see that being frustrating for people. Like I said, I didn't have that problem because I know enough about who they are. I wouldn't say I'm particularly au fait with their work, but I know enough.
Yeah.
So I know how famous they are. I know what happened to them later in life. I know, they're famous for being famous, right? But like, if you don't know who they are, you might struggle. So it's a downvote for me on that for Mr. Sorkin. We are given plenty of flashback scenes to the actual protest to get an idea about what went on and the kind of event it was. But again, like we aren't given context about who these people are, where they've come from. There's a couple of a couple of lines of text in the film at the start of it going, oh, in the 60s there were radicals and they were called the yippies,
Okay.
You know what it probably might have been cool, and it might have been an interesting way of doing it. You remember in the Suicide Squad when we met each of the this is the end of the first and last time. Flashcard. Remember, we meet a new character with a flashcard. Harley Quinn, she's crazy or whatever. Let me have a little 20-second, 30-second, music video of who they are and where they come from.
Yeah.
It didn't really work in Suicide Squad,
but it had a chance here.
Maybe something less flashy or stylized might have worked here. It's like like we introduced to Abby Hoffman and we're like, we give 30 seconds on who Abby Hoffman is and why he's famous, and and that sort of thing. I guess it didn't bother me. The other part that might bother some people is this is a very, unsurprisingly, a very political film. These people were basically put on. It was basically a political trial. It was a political show trial by Nixon's Justice Department to try and squash people who disagreed with war, because that was what Nixon did. And it has very strong parallels to the world of 2020. And I don't think anyone who's seen anything by Aaron Sorkin before will be surprised by that. It's just the kind of thing he's known for doing. I think he sort of said that, I think there's a line from somewhere that Aaron Sorkin described the film as being more about the modern day than the 1960s. He explained that the script didn't change the mirror of the times changed the mirror of the script. That's a very Sorkin-esque thing to say. But also, have you ever seen The West Wing? I mean, all the Newsroom, I've talked about it before because I love both those shows, but they're both basically liberal fantasies.
Yeah.
To use the American sense of a word, liberal, in the sense that, like in West Wing, we have a morally upstanding, pragmatic president, fatherly figure in Jed Bartlet. Always willing to stand up to do the right thing to his own, to bring out the best in America. And then in Newsroom, we have almost the same thing in Will McAvoy, who's his father figure of a Newsroom, who's upstanding and moral and always willing to stand up and do the right thing in the interest of the American people, right?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, but especially in Newsroom, he spent a lot of time, Will McAvoy's character, a lot of time sticking the boots into right wingers and Tea Party and stuff like that, which was popular at the time when the show was being made. I don't think there's any argument about where Mr. Sorkin stands on Mr. Trump. I would imagine. I imagine he's not a fan. So again, if you are somebody who just wants some escapism, this is probably not your film because, maybe you're very, very good at just switching your brain off and going, this is just a piece of entertainment. But I struggle to watch it without going, I can see exactly what you're getting at there, which is the intended effect. So if that's going to bother you, keep that in mind.
I'm seeing on IMDb that it's 3 tags: that it's drama, that it's history, and that it's a thriller.
Yeah, thriller's a strong word. I mean,
okay.
It's a courtroom drama.
Because from the trailer that I got and just the type of story that it seems to be, I'm getting more maybe the kind of what's the Robert Redford, Woodward and Bernstein movie?
All the President's Men.
Yeah,
more of that, but not quite with the whodunit angle that they had in that film. In the sense of, I think more A Few Good Men.
Oh, okay.
Again, without the whodunit angle, like there's no, so it's hard to say. It's really heavy on the courtroom stuff. Like there's a lot of courtroom drama there, and it's you're never really in any doubt that. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going to spoil it for people here, but they do get found guilty. But I mean, I think it's really about trying to tell a story about a political motivation to make people, going into a trial with a predetermined outcome.
Okay.
But at the same time, one of the interesting things, I wonder if this is actually true, is that Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays Richard Schultz, who is the government prosecutor.
Okay.
So he's prosecuting the case against the Chicago 7. But we're told pretty much early on that he doesn't agree with his prosecution and that he doesn't think he should be doing it, but he does it anyway because it's kind of his job. He's honor bound to sort of do his job and blah, blah, blah. So he's almost played as a sympathetic figure in amongst it all. So I'm wondering if that's actually true. I have to look into that. I feel like he's taken some license there. So it's enjoyable to me. If you like a historical courtroom drama is maybe one way to put it. A story about the value of activism. But on that front, I find it actually kind of a little bit depressing because these guys, they worked really hard to put their bodies on the line in the 60s to try and change the world, but they failed miserably. Abby Hoffman ended up killing himself in 1989, I think. And one of the reasons given was he was kind of dismayed at the failure of that generation from the 60s, the activist generation that kind of conceded and became the yuppies of the 90s, 80s and 90s. I'm putting those last words in, but apparently it's a bit disillusioned. So, look, I enjoyed it. I think the cast is incredible for the most part. I don't like Eddie Redmayne, period, but he's fine in this. I think he just says Eddie Redmayne. Sacha Baron Cohen is awesome. He really disappears into Abby Hoffman. Like I said, Jeremy Strong, notable as Jerry Rubin. and a special call outs to Mark Rylance, who was one of my favorite. The cast becoming one of my favorite actors. I think one of the most underrated actors in Hollywood these days is Mark Rylance. I mean, he's Academy Award winner. If he can be underrated as an Academy Award winner, I think he is. He plays William Kunstler, who was their lawyer, and he's fantastic. Frank Langella is channeling his role as Skeletor and playing. Like, this is the best villain he's played since Skeletor. If you don't think he played Skeletor, if you think I'm making that up, I'm not making it up. He really did play Skeletor.
That would be awesome.
But I like it. If you like history, I recommend it. Check it out. It's entertaining stuff. You know what you're going to get with Aaron Sorkin. It's always going to be super well written. Yeah,
I get the feeling it's potentially a little bit heavy-handed for the layperson who might be just tempted to dip their toe in. This sounds like a very different beast of a movie to like when you generally think of Sacha Baron Cohen, or you think of a lot of Joseph Gordon-Levitt's movies. There's a bit more brevity to them and a bit more kind of wholesomeness for Joseph Gordon-Levitt and that kind of counterculture comedy. This sounds like a very, very straight-laced, very kind of almost laser-focused messaging on all parts.
It's there. I mean, it's not all heavy at the same time in the sense that Abby Hoffman was kind of it was a funny guy. And they were actually prone to stunts. So, like turning up to court in a judge's robe on one particular day, and when the judge tells them to take it off, they've got a police uniform underneath it and stuff like that. So, you know, Sacha Baron, maybe it's not a great stretch for him in the sense he's playing a guy who has some very firm ideas, but wasn't afraid to use laughter and humor to get his ideas across. So yeah, it's not all heavy. It is, you know, isn't it? It does take some. It is some amusing parts to it, but you're right. At the end of the day, it's the driving force behind it is to say, you know, we have a history of protest, and the police. Maybe they haven't got a lot better. They've kind of for a long time they've been an enemy to part of the population. So yeah, it get controversial here. That's what the film is saying, not necessarily me. It's just I don't want to fuck with the cops, right? Like they'll make your day bad.
Now, unless you have any final thoughts on the trial of the Chicago 7.
No, check it out, guys.
Well, how about you tell us about your live web gig that you experienced?
Yeah, so I won't spend too long on this, but I'd like you to have a listen to this if you feel you've got time for it. This record. On Saturday night, a friend and I went to a gig, or the best facsimile of going to a gig that we can at the moment. We sat down at home and watched a live streamed Puscifer gig. For those who aren't familiar with who Puscifer are, Puscifer is one of the side projects of James Maynard Keenan of Tool fame and A Perfect Circle. This is like the one down. This is like the really super experimental side project that he works on for stuff that doesn't fit the other two bands. I've actually seen Puscifer live before. I saw them when they were in Australia here about 4 years ago, and it was one of the most memorable gigs I've ever been to. Because they had like an actual wrestling ring set up on stage, and they had actual lucha libre wrestlers doing stuff, and then the band would come on and sing for a few songs, and the wrestlers would do stuff, and in the end they ended up having a cockfight between which were basically rubber chickens stuck on top of Roombas in a cockfighting ring. It was one of the strangest things I've ever seen, but it was utterly brilliant. Amazing. I enjoyed it, and for a band and they were giving away free tickets like candy. No one bought tickets to see these shows.
They weren't advertising rubber chicken cockfighting.
If everybody I've told sort of had the same reaction. That needs to be their selling point next time. So Puscifer, the show on Saturday night was them playing their new album, Existential Reckoning. That's what it's called. Okay. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it. And now
I have just downloaded it, so I will have a read.
Oh, listen.
Have a listen. Yep.
Oh, I don't think the lyrics are included.
I'm just going to read the names of each of the songs, not listen to them. I'm just going to read the name and then try and give my synopsis of what each song would sound like just from the name.
Okay, yeah, that would be an interesting exercise. This was performed. They performed their entire new album from Arco Santi, which is in Arizona. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I didn't know what the hell that was, other than it looks super weird in the live stream show. But do Google it. It's a fascinating place. I think I want to go there now. Maynard, for those who don't know, he's based out in that way now. He lives, I think, in Arizona. He has a winery and a restaurant, which is an interesting side gig for a musician. Wow, this show was freaking brilliant. I really, 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 really enjoyed this. It had a really super weird vibe about it. Like we spent half the thing going, where the hell is this town? What is this town? What are they performing in? It was just like this town is basically a plan. Almost the town itself is almost a piece of art. It's the best way I can describe it. Read the Wikipedia article. It's hard to say, but and their costuming was really weird. So Maynard kind of had this amazing makeup outfit sort of thing going on. It kind of made him look like a cross between Ronald Reagan and Max Headroom. Yeah, super weird. So I was like, okay, I'm trying to, and it kind of had a sci-fi-ish kind of theme to it as well. I guess the way to describe it, where I kind of landed with it was it kind of felt like if aliens landed and were trying to look human. I think they might actually look a little bit like what Maynard's outfit looked like. So yeah, it's not very descriptive, but that's just kind of it's the only way I can describe it.
All right.
I'm just going to I don't know how to put a chat in. I don't think I can actually put chats in to our.
There we go.
Yeah, I just put it in a private chat. You can click on that while I'm talking if you like, and that's the music video for one of it, and that's actually I think part of the show in the sense that actually it's got a very similar sort of look and feel to it. So it's almost like if aliens landed in the Arizona desert and they'd been watching TV for 40 years and they kind of tried to make themselves look like they were human, I think they would try to look and move a little bit like Maynard moves. It looks and moves in this show and in the film clip. Also, I would love to share it with everybody, but I can't use the chat. Now Maynard is not just Maynard. I should note it is a band as a whole, though they do tend to move around a little bit, like there are different members at different times. For the last couple of records, Maynard's been joined as co-vocalist by Karina Round. Don't expect everybody to know who she is. I'd never heard of her before. I saw her perform with Puscifer. She's a wonderful British musician. She's from Wolverhampton. I don't know where that is.
That is a place.
It's a place. Have you been there?
I don't think I have, because from what I understand, there's not much there.
Probably not. That's probably why she joined the band. So she's got a wonderful voice, and her voice just meshes so well with Maynard's. Like they're vocalizing together is incredible, and they just. I mean, like you go back to some of their earlier records, the band's earlier records, like V's for Vagina. Yes, that's one of their records. Or what was the other one was called? C is for a sophomoric euphemism for female genitalia. That might actually be one of their records. I can't remember the exact title. No, here is C is for please insert sophomoric genitalia reference here. He didn't have Karina to work with on those albums, and I think it elevates him to an entirely new level. And again, she's got a really bizarre look in this show. Huge hair, and again, just bizarre looking woman. And the staging was amazing. They were at some points they were in some sort of bizarre Romanesque amphitheater. At other points, they were in this huge sort of structure with lights going everywhere, and in this big tower in the middle. There would just be the two of them standing in there and performing and doing some really weird dance moves, but just not like Peter Garrett weird dance moves, but kind of dance moves that somehow felt like they're in character. It's hard to tell. So from a visual perspective, it was actually a visual treat. And there were no explosions or, tanks or, anything crazy going on. It's just the staging was gorgeous. And then I go back to the way they staged that show I saw 4 years ago. It's just a really creative way of staging a show, with Roombas and rubber chickens and lucha libre wrestlers and stuff going on. It was just strange, but it works. It really, I feel like Puscifer maybe for them is a project that's not just about music; it's about the visual to a degree as well. And I don't know this because he's a famously sort of prickly character, Maynard, but I almost feel like he has a whole concept behind the music. So there's the record, the music, the visuals, almost an idea that connects the whole thing. Does that make sense? It's an idea in his head about like old 50s sci-fi movies and like UFOs crashing at Roswell, and like that almost inspires the music, which then inspires the visuals, which forms a bigger part of the whole. And that really came through as well. So the actual record itself, I'm really enjoying it. It's a lot less aggressive than Tool. I don't know what you would classify them as, like sort of art rock. I don't know what genre they fit in. Okay. They're less, they're not as loud as Tool. They're not as metal as Tool. I don't think I call them metal at all, really. They're just, but they're really interesting music. And if nothing else, if you end your live stream gig with them on stage at a shitty bar doing tone-deaf karaoke while drunk, you've got me, man. You have got me. And seriously, at one point, he and Karina are on stage while the band is watching onto this bad karaoke disapprovingly. And Maynard gets his phone out and says, "Siri, show me Puscifer lyrics." It was brilliant. And as I said to you, I think before we started, I was super disappointed that it was the band are only making it available for live stream and on demand. So, which I think is concluded now, guys. So I'm sorry, I'm totally selling this show for you that you can't watch because I don't think they're live streaming it anymore. I think it was for about a week and that was done. I went to their website going, please let me buy a copy of this. Not at all. I want the whole thing. I want the video. I want to buy the video of this show, and they're not selling it. I think that you can get the album, you can buy T-shirts, you can buy posters,
but you can't get the visuals.
I can't get the actual show, the video of the show, which I would love to keep. But they're not selling it. So what can you do? Other than to say that if they tour again, Australia, I'll be 100% going to see them. If for some reason they make it available again, if you see it pop up if you're curious, do check out Existential Reckoning. It's their new record. You could check out maybe their last record, which was called Money Shot, which was very good as well. And just keep an eye on their socials, right? Maybe we'll get lucky, and they might decide, should a popular band, we're going to put it out there again, and you can buy it and watch it again for a week.
Cool. Now, my thought on that whole thing is, if they ever decide to make an autobiography, it needs to be Roombas and Rubber Chickens, the Puscifer story.
Maybe.
Come on.
Like I said, I only ever went to that show because a friend of mine, a mutual friend of ours, Robin, friend of a show, actually got in touch and said, "You like Tool, don't you?" I'm like, "Yeah, you want to go see Maynard tonight?" I wasn't working at the time, so it was a Sunday night, and I thought, I got nowhere else to be, I'll go. And like I said, they actually, for some reason, they hadn't advertised it very well or something. So some guy she barely knew had a wad of tickets that thick. He was just handing them out to people who he barely knew and get. So yeah, and like I don't even think I even knew at the start of the day they were playing that night, and I got rolled along, and so very rarely does a free show turn out to be any good, but like this one was an absolute joy to have been at, and that made me a fan, and like, I'm really glad. I would have missed this, but again, another friend of the show, Patria, who actually pointed it out to me that it was on. I'm like, hell yes, I'm down to watch that, and I am so glad I did. And so often, like live stream gigs just feel soulless and empty. Like there are occasions, there's a venue here in Melbourne called Cherry Bar, which is a famous rock and roll venue. And during the lockdown, they would have first lockdown when they were still allowed to have bands. No one was allowed to be there, but the band would play and you could pay, $20 and live stream a show. It just felt empty and weird and soulless to see a band playing an amazing song and no applause, just dead silence at the end of it, or maybe one or two people are going, yeah. But
generic noise.
Yeah, these guys just kind of got it right, I guess, because it was and I did see Nick Cave one a few months ago. We did something similar because it was pre-recorded. We got to slice and dice that made it look nice, and it didn't feel. I don't think you can try and replicate the feel of an actual live show in a live stream. So try and do something different, which is what Puscifer did here and what Nick Cave did as well.
That's great. That sounds really good. That's really encouraging for so much of it. And it's like I got home yesterday and Shay was watching on the Disney Channel The Greatest Showman, and there is a point to this, I promise. And I looked at it and I thought, yeah, that looks like a very well-filmed musical, and it just reiterated in my mind straight away. Musicals I would probably appreciate musicals much better as actual stage plays rather than filmed musical theater, which is what they are, because they're not utilizing the medium of cinema very well. Whereas you get things like this where they are actually going, yep, okay, these are our limitations. How can we deliver the best product? And there's that consideration for, yep, maybe we don't have a literal live audience here to get that adrenaline going for the band or to build the hype, like watching fucking wrestling during empty stadiums and watching football and things. It's weird. So working out how to use technology to help bring it in a different way. Like the AEW group were really good for their wrestling. They did a lot more kind of almost cinematic stuff, and they were bringing cameras around and actually getting you away from these big stadiums where there was no one to show you these more kind of microscopic little shots, and it just made a compelling story, and it made the matches feel more personal and aggressive and impressive.
But you're right, they needed to do something different. And unfortunately, I guess for AEW, because they're so new and young, they're kind of in a position to be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more nimble, as opposed to WWE kind of stuck in their ways. And I think in this sense, no one better place to think about things differently than Maynard, who is a really weird dude. In a really great way. And this really worked out well for him, like I said, in not staging it like a traditional concert, but staging it like something completely different. A weird, a sort of weird aliens communicating with their mothership or something in the desert of Arizona. That kind of really worked. It was like almost, it didn't have a storyline. It was almost like a David Lynch film. Just sit back, enjoy the music, and let it wash over you.
The way you're describing these aliens pretending to be humans, I've got this weird cross in my head of the aliens from The Simpsons when they attempt to be the presidential candidates, and the Coneheads. Very
much like the aliens from like, abortions for some, tiny American flags for everyone. Always spinning towards victory.
Whirling.
Go ahead, waste your vote. It's exactly what it felt like, right? It was an invasion of body snatchers type stuff. So I wish I could demonstrate, but yeah, George has put the link to the music video to Theorem. But in the chat, if you're watching, we'll pop it on the Facebook page later if we remember. Just something you get a taste of what I'm talking about.
Yeah. All right. Well, that, I think, brings us rather nicely to the end of the show. We talked about Star Trek The Undiscovered Country as our chain movie, and Travis is taking us, care of Christopher Plummer, to The Inside Man. Next, I talked about we both talked about the peaks and troughs of the OG and Next Generation Star Trek movies and our thoughts on that. The Trial of the Chicago 7, care of Netflix, and finished off with Puscifer. The last thing that I have to say about the whole thing is I managed to get through that whole Trial of Chicago 7 thing where you were mentioning Richard Nixon occasionally, and I didn't go, "Arroo."
It took a lot of effort, I can tell.
Yeah. I needed to say it, and I just said it, and now I feel better. But on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We will see you next week. Good night.
Good night.